Welcome to part two, and as we were suggesting, right, we could actually measure progress by counting the number of affect-laden emotional expressions as one measure of the therapeutic process. Let's talk a little bit about discursive psychology, and that is analyzing emotion through discourse analysis. And this is the deconstruction of psychology talk. So again, I'm going to use that term deconstruction. It assumes that language word choice has meaning that can facilitate understanding of the world, of the word. And I find this area of psycholinguistics fascinating. Most of the time when we speak, right, we're not consciously choosing each word that comes out of our mouth. There's something that we want to express, but the word choice is largely non-conscious. And there might be value then, because if word choice is non-conscious, why this word rather than that word? What in the non-conscious selected one word? And it could be habit, it could just be frequency of use that we prefer a given word. But words do have meanings, and I think sometimes that words can be revealing in this sense about the true intent of the actor's communication. So consider the concepts of phenomenal field or psychological reality, and we have Lewin or Carl Rogers that can offer each one of those. Emotion, talk, and narrative is rich and various, and that then also indicates then why was this word selected over that word necessarily. And emotion in everyday talk can account for observed behaviors. That is, there can be a pretty strong correlation. It has the potential to offer excuses for behavior. I was so mad that I couldn't help it. And at the core of this excuse then is the emotion as an explanation. And notice that it also then describes a person's naive theory of emotion, that anger somehow justifies out of control responses or reactions. So a bunch of different ways to look at this. Now, emotion talk is a rhetorical device then. Edward lists, these devices as rhetorical positions or contrasts. And that is when we're looking at a discourse, a piece of writing, or listening to a speech, a narrative that someone is given verbally, to what extent are we looking at emotion and emotional description versus cognition, right? To what extent is the narrative expressing emotions as rational or irrational? Another way that we can slice and dice it is emotion is cognitively grounded or cognitively consequential. Is it event-driven? That is, are the references mostly to the power of the situation, or is it largely dispositional, which is a reliance on description of what's occurring as a result of traits and dispositions, right? And also then, when we jumping off from dispositions, is it disposition as a long-term feature of the person, or is it a temporary state, right? And you can see these examples. Life is an adventure. Oh no, life is love. Enjoy it. So these rhetorical positions, life is, that's my position, is my statement, and then the implication of that statement. So we can often look at how one uses language in a written or spoken narrative in these regards. Some other further examples: emotional behavior is controllable, right? Action or passive reaction. To what extent does the person believe and operate from a position that there's control over emotion? Is it spontaneous or was it causal? And this can be the relationship of fate to chance, right? Natural versus moral. Now, these last two slides, this slide, I'm not going to ask any questions on the exam. I know that's a question that students often, oh my God, do I have to know all this? And I'm going to free the burden of your mind from these two in being part of the quiz. Okay? So, applications of Edwards' rhetorical analysis. Don't get mired in the details, as I suggest, but let's take a look, right? So we go from experience to narrative, right? And this is a description, a narrative of an accident, and it was almost like my emotions were charged. That's how I could feel. I was almost buzzing with my emotions, but somewhere in the back of my mind, the sensorial part of me, the logical part, took over to say, you got to do this, you got to go stop these people going into the road. So in this, what we see as a rhetorical device is really control versus lack of control. And what's up for grabs is, while the emotions erupt, duty requires, or the situation requires, that I in fact devote less and less energy to monitoring my emotions and more energy into operating in a reasonable fashion. Right? So kind of the core of that narrative. What we're talking about here is that we can derive meaning from reading or listening to what someone has said according to the dimensions to which they're referring as we analyze it. Right? Bottom line, what we see in this person is there's an effort to take a situation in which many conflicting elements are experienced, observed, expressed into some kind of cohesive, interpretive, and meaningful manner. And this is a huge aspect of the memory process. So you ask this person about the accident an hour after it happened, or you ask the person about an accident a week after it happened, and you're going to have two very different accounts. And you're going to see these rhetorical devices transform from one account, the early account, to the later account. And what we're suggesting is that is a sense-making device. And it's to better integrate that memory into who we are given a certain context. Now, let's derive a little meaning. Let's have a little fun here. I just love this commercial. It's probably the only reason I'm showing it more than anything else. I also love Jean-Claude Van Damme, so I'll just get that out of the way right now.
I've had my ups and downs, my fair share of bumpy roads and heavy winds. That's what made me what I am today. Now I stand here before you. What you see is a body crafted to perfection. A pair of legs engineered to defy the laws of physics. And a mindset to master the most epic of splits.
Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows? Only time. And who can say if your love grows as your heart chose? Only time. We are
I think those deserve to be called epic splits. What do you think? Jean-Claude Van Damme, the actor, the martial artist, the body trainer par excellence. You get to some point in your life, right, as you get older and you start reflecting on your life and you start trying to ascertain some meaning. What am I about? What was all of this for? And you can see that the narrative there as he begins it is true to him. It's not just a Volvo commercial that wrote those lines. That's Jean-Claude Van Damme's approach to his life. And he's telling the story in a way that makes sense and integrates that story into who he is, right? So it's epic splits, but it's an epic narrative. And what a freaking amazing commercial, huh? So, and of course, Volvo is using it to create meaning, a narrative about its business progress in developing these guidance systems for semi-trucks. But that's all an aside. I just think it's the most amazing piece of imagery. And being a fan of Jean-Claude Van Damme, what's Jean-Claude Van Damme's most famous movie, probably? In case you want to see him in his martial arts performance, that would be the movie called Bloodsport. So, if you're interested, look that up. All right. So, combining methods, all the preceding techniques offer some utility in bringing meaning to the emotional experience. So, emotion is part of the narrative, but emotion as it comes up some of us believe needs to be explained. Now, these methods can be employed by various disciplines in multiple contexts, but it all relies on deconstructing the narrative and seeking out the emotional components and seeing what purpose they serve. And then, once that's learned, going back and constructing the larger narrative about it. All our devices affect that emotional memory that's part of the larger memorial narrative, the memorial sense-making. So memories that are detached, memories that have no sense, memories that don't connect to us, what's occurred, or what's in the future, are of little value and are likely to be removed from memory. So, I took a class in human memory when I was at UCI. Go Anteaters. What a mascot, huh? And before you just split your sides laughing, who has an anteater for a mascot? I don't know that it's any worse than a semi-poisonous nut. No offense to us Buckeyes, right? So, but I'm both a Buckeye and an anteater. I'll fess up. I'll admit it. Who else is a Buckeye and an anteater? Dr. Drake was an anteater and then a Buckeye. So, but I want to introduce you to Dr. Chubb. I had two classes with Dr. Chubb, human memory and human cognition. He was UCI was weird in his psychology department. There was psych and social behavior both in the School of Social Ecology, but then there was also a straight up kind of cognitive psychology area that was separate. He was in the cognitive psychology area separate. I took two classes with him, and I absolutely adore his classes. They really required a lot of thinking. Just some fascinating readings that we had to do. I remember we read Plato, Theaetetus, many other books of an associated nature. I had nothing but respect from Dr. Chubb. One of the first instructors I ever saw show up in Levi's in a t-shirt to teach class all the time. Maybe you can see where I kind of adopted my dress code. All right, but in the human memory course, as we were getting towards the end of the course, right, and we have a huge background of content now, and he's going to start pitching more conceptual things at us, but he did that throughout the course. He hit us with this question. He asked us if objects had memory, because we were talking about human memory, but does objects have memory? And it's like, what does that mean? And I struggled with this question. I still think about this question. I don't have an answer yet. I mean, I have some pieces of answer, but I haven't developed a cohesive narrative around it, and maybe what follows is part of that narrative, part of my answer to Dr. Chubb. Right? And so I've been generating answers to this question since I took his course in 1998, which is getting to be a heck of a long time now. And he was a Vietnam veteran, and he never talked about his experiences in Vietnam, so I shudder to think what they might have been. But he brought up the example of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, which was newly constructed at the time. Right? And so, do objects have memory? And here we're overlooking, we're on the brief rise above the wall, and we see the people at the wall, and the wall extends. And as we get closer, we see people, in fact, going to the wall, maybe largely as a sense-making device, helping them craft the narrative to make sense of their experiences in the war. One interesting thing about the wall is the names are not like in any kind of alphabetical order, so the names are just in there, and it's like kind of, you know, that in itself, the decision to put the names on the wall in that manner speaks to the narrative about the war. It's a tough war. It's not clear why we were there, necessarily. It's not clear that we ever accomplished anything by our being there. So a narrative constructed around the war, World War II is an easy war to construct a narrative. The Nazis were bad, okay, and we had to fight the Nazis to save the world. And we successfully fought the Nazis and end of story, right? But when we look at the Vietnam War, we have 58,000 American soldiers who died. Over 2 million Vietnamese died. To what end? Because Vietnam remained communist, was communist to this day. To what end was all this? So people come to make sense. They leave objects. One thing that people do when they find the name of their loved one is they'll take a piece of paper, and because these are engraved, they take the paper and they take a pencil or a piece of charcoal, and they memorialize the name on that piece of paper. For many years, it was unclear how many POWs or how many missing in action there were that had never been recovered. We've normalized relationships with the government of Vietnam, so there probably are no more POWs. There may be some more missing in action. Do objects have memory? I think there may be at least one. Regardless, does emotional disclosure guarantee positive outcomes? Well, not necessarily, nor not necessarily as expected. And we look at some meta-analyses here, and for those of you not familiar with meta-analyses is when there's enough studies about a question in a certain area, then some researchers may collect all those studies and then try to draw general conclusions from a multitude of studies. So the meta-analysis, that is, we're analyzing analyses, so to speak. Smith reported general improvements in health. Okay, a 2004 meta-analysis demonstrated improvement in physical but not mental health. So remember, we talked about the stress reduction, yes, and maybe then the immunosuppression was diminished, but not necessarily psychological benefits. 2005 meta-analysis suggests a clear benefit associated with emotional disclosure. But again, what do we know then? When we see conflicting findings, we need to study more. And we need to find the context that explain the difference. We need greater consistency under which the studies are conducted so that we can draw conclusions across multiple studies. And we need a more consistent rapport level with clients and participants in this study so we get more reliable responses. Now, I promise you a philosopher or two, and here's Jean-Paul Sartre, and big existential philosopher, but huge work in existential psychology as well. And he described what he called bad faith narratives. And this is the knowledge of what is socially acceptable can distort narratives of remembered emotional experience. So I may know how I am in the world, but am I Mark right now, or am I your teacher? And let's say that those two aren't necessarily mutually supporting. Let's say they're somewhat misaligned. But if I remember it from the perspective of being a teacher, Sartre is suggesting that I might be creating what he calls a bad faith narrative, that it's not authentic, it's not an authentic expression of who I am. He describes it in terms of watching waiters in a Parisian cafe, and this is Sartre is largely a Parisian, walking about and doing his waiter thing, and waiters in the cafes in Paris are very, very professional. I mean, they will do this all their life, right? But they're acting as a waiter, and what Sartre is saying is that may in fact be a bad faith narrative because it's not actually who they are. They're fulfilling the expectations of the role and the people who are around them. So to the extent that extensive emotion work is conducted, narratives can achieve dramatic distance from reality. That is, the narrative that we are exposed to from a person might have nothing to do with the psychological reality of the person or the situation. And he goes on to say that the deception can be doubly deceptive, and it can be utilized to deceive others, That is, I'm looking proud as a waiter and moving about so that I deceive you, the customers, in sharing this experience. But over time, maybe I come to internalize that, and I'm simply using it to deceive the self as well. I recommend reading Sartre. He's not always an easy read, but it's certainly a fascinating read, if you will. Huis clos. Any of you up on your French? What do you think? Huis clos? No exit. This is one of Sartre's plays. 4 people thrown together into purgatory, which is represented by a room, and they have to spend eternity with each other, hating each other. Fascinating exploration of emotion and freedom, if you will. So, Sartre, man is condemned to be free, and that's a core existential philosophy. Because once thrown into the world, he's responsible for everything he does. It is up to you to give life a meaning. That meaning doesn't exist from elsewhere. And this is one of the core tenets of existential philosophy, existential psychology, is all there is your existence. And it is your choice what it is. Now, there can be external circumstances, and no one argues against that, right? But so, I think we'll call part 2 here as done. I think it's part 2, and we'll go on to the next one.